He didn't cry. That's what got me. 15 years in Roseview Estates, the picture-perfect suburb where every lawn looked like it had been photoshopped and every mailbox matched the exact HOA-approved beige. And when they handed him the generic beige envelope, like some sad party favor for the non-compliant resident, he just stood there still in that oatmeal sweater he wore on board meeting weeks, nodded once, and slipped a flash drive in his shirt pocket like it was a pocket square. No outburst, no speech, just a long, slow blink. The kind that says, "You'll hear from me again, but not the way you expect." Karen Caldwell, our HOA president, who thinks empathy is a passive-aggressive neighborhood email, leaned back in her fake leather chair at the head of the community center table, arms crossed like a smug reality TV judge, and delivered the line she'd probably rehearsed in her rearview mirror. "Don't bother with an appeal. We'll contest every single one. Save your energy." She even smiled like this was a favor. Marcus didn't flinch. He just asked if he could take his pen, the one with the HOA logo etched in cheap faux gold. When Karen gave that theatrical nod, he picked it up like it was an artifact from a fallen empire. Then he walked out past the plastic ficus no one ever watered, past the new neighbor who couldn't meet his eyes, past the bulletin board still proudly displaying last spring's Community Appreciation Week flyer. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. But I saw the way the polished floor shifted, like something foundational had just been quietly removed from Roseview Estates. If you're still here listening, smash that like button and subscribe. 97% of you never do, and it genuinely helps stories like this reach the people who need them. All right, back to it. You got to understand who Marcus was. He didn't gossip at block parties, didn't schmooze at the annual HOA potluck disasters, but he knew every single bylaw clause by heart, kept backup folders on his home computer, and once caught Karen trying to slip in a last-minute rule change minutes before the annual meeting vote that would have let her fine anyone for aesthetic violations without notice. When he flagged it, he didn't yell. He just emailed the version history and CC'd the entire board plus the state HOA regulator's public inbox. He was methodical, quiet, dangerous in that way only truly competent people can be, which is exactly why they got rid of him. Call it enforcement for community standards. That's what they'll tell you. But I was in the back row when the closed session notes called it risk management. Not because of Marcus's lawn. His grass was always exactly 2.75 inches, measured with a ruler. No, the risk was he knew too much. He'd seen too many last-minute liens, too many voluntary home sales that were anything but too many times Karen lost a discrimination complaint just long enough for the statute to expire. And worse, he documented everything. Once at the community picnic, I joked that he must have a bunker somewhere full of old HOA emails and coffee stain violation notices. He just smiled and said, "Some of us keep receipts." I didn't get it then. But now I remember the way he paused by the community center copier on his last day. The old one, the one only Marcus still used because he didn't trust the cloud. He stood there for a beat, printed something, folded it, and tucked it into his envelope under a tangle of charger cords and his annotated copy of the 2018 state HOA statutes. He looked at me once on his way out, just nodded. And then he was gone. That's when the silence started feeling heavier, like a barometric pressure shift before a tornado. And sure enough, Karen kept smiling that same lizard smile like nothing had changed, but you could feel it. Something had been set in motion. We just didn't know it yet. Not until the lien mess. Not until the file folder that accidentally disappeared. Not until his name showed up again weeks later in a way no one expected. But I'll get to that, because if you think Marcus was the kind of man to go quietly, you haven't met someone who weaponized paper cuts. I didn't expect to see him again. Not so soon. But there he was, hunched in the lobby of Roseview Memory Care, the assisted living wing right on the edge of our gated community, rubbing his thumb over a parking stub like he was trying to wear a hole through time. He didn't see me at first, just stared out the window while the receptionist tapped at her keyboard and gave him that look, half patience, half pity. I only caught his eye when I walked past with my mom's prescriptions in hand. He forced a smile, but his face looked wrong, like he'd forgotten how to wear it. "I'm visiting Ruth," he said. I remembered Ruth. Sweet lady. Always wore a brooch and called every nurse honey. Her room was on the second floor, near the bird mural that peeled in the corner. Marcus used to come by twice a week, always brought crossword books and vanilla pudding. That day, though, he wasn't carrying anything but an envelope. And tension. "I'm not on our good standing list anymore," he said, almost like he was apologizing. "They said the assessment exemption hasn't processed." I blinked. "But they're supposed to automatically continue it for family members." "Yeah." His jaw tightened. "They were supposed to." He didn't say more. Didn't have to. I'd lived in Roseview long enough to know the rhythm of HOA betrayals, the quiet ones that slip in like mold behind perfectly painted drywall. That look he had wasn't anger. It was subtraction, like someone had erased a part of him and left the edges frayed. He left the receptionist a note to call if billing escalated, then walked out without seeing his mom. Said he'd be back the next day. That was the moment I realized something was brewing. Marcus didn't miss visits. Not unless something serious had snapped. Later that week I saw him again, this time in the public library, back corner by the dusty HOA statute books no one ever checked out. He had his laptop open, a black coffee untouched beside it, and stacks of printed PDFs with color-coded tabs. I stood far enough away that he didn't see me, but close enough to read the labels. Enforcement Protocol V4, Resident Exit Agreement Templates, Assessment Continuation Statute Section 29, State Real Estate Code 161. The man was building something. That same night my curiosity got the better of me. I looked back through old HOA communications, stuff Marcus used to quietly correct with post-it notes and timestamp PDFs. That's when I saw it. The old names, folks I remembered, Jen, Marco, Denny, all voluntarily sold and left the neighborhood, or so the official minutes said. But I remembered how Denny cried in the driveway while the moving truck idled. How Jen left mid-year with no goodbye. Marcus had copies of all their actual violation histories. I bet my next assessment on it. He once told me, the problem isn't that they lie. The problem is they write the lies in pencil. And he made a career of keeping the ink. I didn't confront him, didn't ask. But every time I passed his old house, still empty and sad-looking with a dented mailbox tray, I noticed things others missed, like the locked file cabinet no one could open, or the fact that his access to the community portal hadn't been fully revoked until 3 days after the meeting. Karen forgot to submit the digital revocation form on time. A rookie mistake. Or maybe just arrogance. What really did it, though, was the typo in his enforcement letter. Marcus wouldn't have missed it. A clause about liens being at the board's discretion that contradicted a 2016 HOA memo he helped write. I remembered that memo. He cited case law, quoted it word for word during a brown bag lunch when legal counsel was trying to sneak in arbitration waivers. And now they tripped over their own paper trail. He was piecing something together slowly, quietly, but with the precision of someone who's waited years for the right day. And when it came, they wouldn't even see it coming. Marcus didn't drive his usual car to the appointment. He borrowed his cousin's weathered Buick, the kind of inconspicuous vehicle that blends into parking lots and doesn't get noticed by the kind of people who skin license plates for gossip. I only knew because he told me later in passing, like it wasn't the most calculated part of his plan. The attorney's office sat between a bail bonds place and a vape shop with a broken open sign. Not exactly prestige, but that was the point. He wasn't looking for flash. He was looking for firepower with nothing to lose. And he found it in a woman named Sheila Dawn, HOA law specialist. 10 years running class actions for homeowners chewed up by loopholes. Her Yelp reviews called her aggressive, ruthless, and my personal favorite, a smiling hammer. He walked in with a zip folder titled "For Legal Eyes Only." Said he'd been backing up files since 2018. Said he wasn't angry, just ready. Sheila raised an eyebrow when she opened the drive. 10 minutes in, she stopped scrolling. 20 minutes in, she started printing. There were spreadsheets with color-coded timestamp trails, violation data, showing selective enforcement against certain residents while others got away with the exact same infractions. There were internal HOA memos marked "Do not circulate," detailing strategic language for forcing sales. There was even a side-by-side comparison of assessment reports, actual versus filed, for a 6-month stretch where fines had mysteriously vanished into Karen's personal community events fund. But what made her lean back in her chair and whistle was the email chain. A board director had instructed a junior secretary to retroactively change a resident's file to read voluntary sale 3 days after that same resident had been threatened with foreclosure. And Marcus had it with timestamps, with metadata, with the secretary's panicked follow-up. "Are we sure this is okay?" Sheila folded her hands. "This isn't a complaint. It's a pattern." Marcus nodded. "Can you file under your name?" She frowned. "You're not interested in being the face of this." "No," he said, calm as ever. "I'm interested in them not knowing who they're dealing with." "Not yet." She took the case, filed discreetly under her firm's banner, didn't name Marcus in the paperwork, didn't trigger the HOA's automatic response filters, just sent the first volley into the machine and waited. And Marcus, he disappeared. Not physically, he still visited his mom, still walked the block, still shopped at the same grocery store. But digitally, he vanished. No Nextdoor updates, no community forum posts, no email forwarding. He shut down every trace of his digital existence, like someone wiping a drive. I heard he even called his old roommate from college, a cybersecurity geek, to help close the windows, whatever that means. The community center buzzed for a week after the news of a state complaint broke, vaguely through whispers and assumption. Nobody knew who it was. The board said it was frivolous. Legal counsel said it was standard. Karen, she said nothing, just clicked her pen like a nervous tick and avoided eye contact. But some of us remembered. Remembered Marcus's binders. Remembered his quiet sighs when rules got updated overnight. Remembered the way he used to say, "If you're going to erase history, don't forget I wrote the first draft." They thought he'd been buried. They didn't realize he'd buried the fuse. They were already drafting their canned response before the legal notice even hit the printer tray. Karen sat at the head of the conference table like she was running a high-stakes poker game, only she thought she held a full house and didn't notice the hole in the table. It's probably one of those new families who thinks they're owed perfect lawns without paying dues, she scoffed, twirling her pen like she wanted it to stab the air. "We'll hit them with the arbitration clause in the covenants, and that'll be the end of it. No big deal." Across from her, the board secretary Janice, the one with a forced laugh and a desk full of fake succulents, nodded too quickly. "Let legal swat it down," she echoed like she just won a spelling bee. They passed around talking points, prepped "we take compliance seriously" internal email blast, and started rehearsing lines for the all-hands neighborhood meeting no one asked for. It was theater, cheap theater, but the kind that plays just well enough to keep the homeowners calm. Then Paige, barely 2 months into her admin role and still terrified of touching anything marked confidential, spoke up. "I noticed something weird," she said, her voice too soft for that room. One of the email addresses listed in the notice. The formatting matches old compliance report submissions. Karen blinked. "What kind of formatting?" Paige pulled up a sample, underscore before the initials, double-digit day stamp. It's how Marcus labeled all his early flag reports. The room quieted for a second. Not long, just enough to notice. Janice dismissed it with a wave. Coincidence. Marcus wouldn't stir the pot. "He's too polite." Someone muttered, "Predictable." Janice corrected, forcing a chuckle that no one joined in on. Besides, he took that old desktop with him. Nothing on the servers, nothing traceable. But even as they brushed it off with smugness, something changed. Because in another room, much smaller, much quieter, 2 legal associates were whispering over a stack of printed emails and audit logs. One of them, Miguel, had been around long enough to remember a time Marcus flagged a conflict of interest clause that saved the HOA a 6-figure fine. And now Miguel was holding a report that seemed too clean, too recent, too deliberate. He ran a script against internal correspondence going back 5 years. Started matching phrases from the legal notice to archived reports. Selective enforcement logs. Assessment discrepancies. Ghost projects. Each match came with a timestamp, and every timestamp circled back to Marcus's old folders. Miguel didn't tell Karen. Not yet. He just kept printing. Later that afternoon, the state investigator quietly scheduled an internal audit sweep. No press, no warnings, just a silent ping to the compliance review team with a subject line, urgent, look back, governance exposure risk. On the surface, nothing looked wrong. The board sent their usual upbeat next-door messages. Janice hosted a webinar on positive neighbor experiences. Karen went back to her Pilates and Pinot Instagram routine. But under the hood, people were waking up because someone hadn't just filed a complaint, they'd mapped a minefield. And the first crack had just formed beneath their designer heels. It was a Tuesday. Quiet, normal, boring. One of those days where people pretend to water their lawns while secretly refreshing Zillow listings they'll never afford. Janice had just finished her second caramel latte and was gearing up to deliver a painfully forced birthday card to someone in accounting when the community center doors dinged. Two people stepped out. No badges, no smiles, just dark blazers, neutral expressions, and the kind of posture that says we don't knock. They didn't wait for reception. Walked straight through like they practiced it. Past the wall of meaningless Best Community 2020 plaques and the decorative shelf full of untouched HOA awards. Straight into the board's glass office like it was theirs. One man, one woman. Both carried black zip folders. No nonsense. No emotion. Karen Caldwell, the man asked. She looked up, confused, but still in her customer service voice. Yes, can I help? We're from the State Department of Real Estate. We're delivering a formal request under Section 211 of the HOA Governance Act. Just like that, Janice, sitting a few desks over, visibly paled. Her screen still showed an open group chat with Karen titled, Recontain Any Fallout. The woman investigator slid a sealed folder across the table like it was evidence in a courtroom. Karen stared at it for a beat too long. Then she opened it, and there it was. Page 1. Complainant. Marcus Hale. I wasn't in the room, but someone was. Someone who later told me she didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Just sat there, lips parted, staring at the name like it was a ghost, like it had scratched its way back up through the perfectly manicured sod with receipts in both hands. Then, in that brittle HOA tone she defaulted to when trying not to scream, Karen asked, and this is about Marcus's enforcement action? The agent didn't blink. It's about patterns, your association's enforcement classification system, assessment handling process, and selective fine policies. Mr. Hale's documentation triggered a broader inquiry. A broader inquiry, which is legal speak for, we're not just looking at him. We're looking at all of it. They asked for digital records, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, audit logs, and emails. They had a printed list. It was 4 pages long. They requested interviews, not optional. They wanted names of everyone on the board for the past 7 years. They wanted financial documentation tied to bonus incentives for cost-saving liens. They asked about the internal software used to classify violations, the same one Marcus once flagged for quietly defaulting residents to non-compliant status. Karen nodded. Janice stopped breathing. Paige, poor thing, drop her pen. Nobody laughed. Nobody said frivolous or standard or we'll swat it down because now the SWAT team was in the building and they weren't leaving with cupcakes and swag. That afternoon, every cul-de-sac buzzed with whispers. Who filed it? What's it about? Why Marcus? But no one had answers. Just a growing sense that something huge had just cracked open beneath us, and we were all standing on it. Later, someone saw Karen in the stairwell. Phone pressed her ear, voice tight and low. They brought up ghost projects. She hissed. We need to scrub the... Then she stopped talking. Maybe because she realized that this time the walls really were listening. And Marcus, still gone, still off the grid. But his name wasn't gone. It was there, bold, inked on page 1 estate folder. And suddenly it weighed more than the whole HOA board combined. It started with a clipboard and a polite knock. By Friday, it felt like a crime scene. The state investigators didn't yell, didn't posture. They just quietly requested time. 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Started with the junior folks, admins, receptionists, maintenance coordinators, the people no one ever asks about until it's too late. And that's when it all began to unravel. First came the whispers. That Marcus, quiet, cardigan-wearing Marcus, hadn't just taken his flash drive when he left. He'd left behind something. An index. Not in the obvious places. No, that would have been too easy. But buried in shared drives, misnamed things like Q3 landscaping materials and old desk references. And it was dated, labeled, cross-referenced. Someone found it probably by accident. It contained archived approval chains, old policy versions, and an internal org chart showing discrepancies between listed projects and real ones. One doc caught particular attention. Ghost Project Reconciliation Report, time-stamped, initialed. It showed how the board would create temp vendor positions in the budget to simulate maintenance spending during audits, positions that didn't exist and were closed days later without ever hiring a soul. The idea was to make the financial numbers match state funding requirements without actually doing the work. That alone would have been a scandal. But it got worse because Marcus had also logged every change made to the selective enforcement roster over 4 years. Dozens of names, residents who had followed every rule reported to the board, used community tools, but were hit with fines anyway, while Karen's friends got waivers. The approval process was just a checkbox in an internal tool, one that legal now realized had no audit trail because it had been streamlined years ago on Karen's suggestion. Marcus had saved screenshots, even tracked how Karen once retroactively changed a violation listing from minor to major 2 weeks after someone complained just to avoid refund obligations. People were called in one by one. Paige cried after her interview. One of the landscape managers came out white as drywall and didn't go back to his truck. The maintenance director canceled his trip to Orlando. And somewhere between interviews, someone slipped. Someone mentioned that Marcus hadn't just kept his receipts. He'd planted them quietly, strategically, like time bombs. Like he knew the house of cards would fall and wanted to make sure it hit every single cul-de-sac on the way down. The treasurer tried to play defense, got on the phone with legal and suggested a quick settlement, a payout to minimize exposure. But the state agents declined. Procedure was already formalized. They couldn't just pay to make it vanish. Not anymore. Not with keywords like willful misclassification and systemic fraud starting to appear in the formal language. Control started slipping like sand through manicured fingers. Weekly board meetings became daily ones. All resident updates started landing in inboxes every other hour. People stopped sitting at the community picnic tables near the HOA side of the park. Karen moved her files to a locked cabinet. Janice stopped posting on Nextdoor. I caught her once staring at her screen like it might suddenly spit out an arrest warrant. Because once that Ghost Project document came out, and once people realized it had been initialed by both the board and finance, it wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about everyone who signed, everyone who looked away, everyone who thought a paper trail couldn't scream. They stopped saying his name like it was a stain. Now, they said it like a warning, like a ghost story you whisper at the edge of the community pool, half hoping he won't hear you from whatever shadowed place he'd vanished into. Marcus. Not that guy from the old board. No, it was Marcus. Sharp, syllabic, and heavy. You would hear it in corners. Did you hear what Marcus had on them? Someone said, Marcus predicted this 3 years ago. Marcus left breadcrumbs. Check the finance templates. People who hadn't even lived here during his time started referencing him like he was folklore, a myth built from metadata, like he'd written his name into the neighborhood's bones. Then came the memo. Someone, I won't say who, slipped it to him, scanned it from their work phone, sent it through a burner Gmail made just for the occasion. Subject line, you should see this. It was plain, just bullet points, no official letterhead, but the language was unmistakable. In the event you are contacted by the State Department of Real Estate, do not speculate about or reference any current or former resident suspected of initiating the complaint. In particular, avoid mention of M. Hail unless formally instructed by legal. unless formally instructed, like his name was a grenade and they were waiting for the pin to finish spinning. When I showed it to Marcus weeks later in a quiet cafe, where he still took his coffee black and his answers slower than most people had patience for, he didn't laugh. He just pressed 2 fingers to his lips like he was holding in something. Then he smiled. "Funny," he said. "I offered to fix their process once. I remembered. He drafted a new HOA integrity policy back in 2019. I saw it. 30 pages, color-coded appendices, automated audit suggestions, even a peer review clause. He called it Compliance Flow 3.0. Said it could cut legal risk by 60% and prevent at least 3 recurring violations per quarter. He gave a presentation in the small conference room with a broken HDMI port. Brought muffins. Karen didn't even look at the packet. Called it too picky. Said, "We don't need more bureaucracy, Marcus. We need people to stop playing hall monitor." Janice rolled her eyes and whispered something about him being the HOA version of a hall pass Nazi. So he shelved it. Never pushed. Just filed it away in that same corner of his mind where he kept every overlooked correction, every offhand insult, every eye roll that came when he tried to make things better. They said no to the policy. So he became the policy. Now they were tearing apart their own systems, trying to understand what he already knew. And all Marcus did was sip his coffee, watching a toddler knock over napkin holders with more grace than the board had shown this entire month. I asked if he felt vindicated, if he was going to post something online, re-emerge, take credit. He shook his head. "I'm not interested in credit." "Then what?" I asked. He looked past me out the window, the street reflected in his glasses. "I just want the next poor kid who moves here to be able to ask questions without getting fined for it." And in that moment, I realized the real shift wasn't the panic in the board suite or the lawyers scrambling to rewrite covenants. It was that they were hiding from him, and he was done hiding from anyone. The email hit every inbox at 9:03 a.m. Subject line in bold, stamped with a red exclamation mark like it was just another reminder about phishing awareness training. Notice of formal action. State Department of Real Estate Compliance findings. Nobody moved. Phones buzzed. Heads lifted. Even the retirees who usually kept their hearing aids off pulled one earbud out to listen. The silence was sharp, like the oxygen had been yanked from the entire neighborhood. The memo laid it out plainly. The state had concluded its investigation. Findings included multiple confirmed counts of selective enforcement, willful misclassification of violations, failure to provide statutorily mandated assessment continuations, and the maintenance of fraudulent ghost projects to mislead audits. There were no euphemisms, no hedging, just law. Penalties estimated at $4.6 million pending final audit. Within hours, the board president's office was emptied. Fake succulents gone. Nameplate yanked clean. Her next door status changed to deactivated. Karen didn't even say goodbye. Security walked her out during the community yoga class. No one clapped. No one spoke. Just the hiss of the glass doors sliding shut behind her like punctuation. Janice tried to hang on. She posted something vague about new chapters and locked her account within the hour. I heard from someone on legal that she'd been placed on indefinite leave. Pending investigation, they said. Everyone knew what that meant. The real stunner came later that afternoon. The HOA attorney, James L., head of corporate counsel, the same man who smugly told the board, "There's no real threat here," and refused to settle early, was let go. Not quietly either. The boardroom glass door was still swinging open when someone from facilities was already removing his name from the directory. His retainer revoked. Turns out he'd misrepresented the severity of the claims in 2 internal memos, now under legal scrutiny themselves. Word spread fast, but the part that really lit the internal rumor engine was Marcus. His name appeared again, this time not in whispers, but on an official offer letter. The new interim board wanted him back, not as a resident, but as a consultant. Independent, full authority to rebuild their compliance structure from the ground up. They even offered back pay for the assessment lapse and a 6-figure retainer. Said he'd bring integrity back to the process. He declined politely, quietly, the way he always did things. He didn't gloat, didn't leak it to the press. He just forwarded the offer to a friend with a single-line reply, "They still don't get it." That evening, I watched from my office window as a moving crew carried out shredded paper bins, busted file cabinets, and a couple of the fake awards from the HOA wall. One fell and cracked on the pavement. No one picked it up. They'd finally paid the price. Not just in money, but in names, in titles, and reputations. In the eyes of the new families, who now whispered not about being the next to get fined, but about how they'd never let this happen again. I called Marcus, asked if he'd heard. "I heard," he said, and he sighed. "It's not about watching them fall. It's about making sure someone's there to rebuild it right after." He didn't want their money. He didn't want their apology. He wanted the system to stop bleeding residents dry. And if they weren't going to fix it, then he damn well wasn't going to help patch it either. The headline ran above the fold in the Sunday local section. Pattern of deceit. State HOA investigation ends in record penalty for Roseview Estates. Underneath a photo of the community center building, facade sunlit, blinds drawn tight, looked almost innocent, like the lies hadn't been printed, signed, and filed in triplicate behind those windows for years. The article named names: Karen Caldwell, Janice, the ex-attorney, now under bar review. The fine, $5.2 million in climbing, resident restitution packages, assessment retroactive coverage, and most curiously, it referenced an anonymous internal source alias submitted as MH, who provided what the State Department described as an unprecedented level of documentation, clarity, and systemic insight. The story got picked up by HOA forums, real estate circles, even a Reddit thread that climbed to the front page. Comments flooded in. "This is why you document everything. MH is a legend. Some people keep receipts. This guy built a fucking archive." And Marcus, he didn't read the comments. Didn't need the spotlight. He just kept doing what he'd always done, showing up with a quiet binder in a better way. I saw him again months later at a coffee shop off 3rd in Langston. Same booth in the corner near the flickering lamp no one fixed. He was hunched beside a fresh-faced, new homeowner in her 20s, wide-eyed, eager, nervous about her first HOA meeting. Marcus had her laptop pulled up to a shared doc titled Employment Practices and Early Policy Guidelines. No jargon, no fluff. Just common sense protections and real enforceable terms. At one point, she leaned back and asked him, "Why are you helping us? I mean, after what you've been through." He paused, watching steam curl from his chipped mug. Then he looked at her gently with none of the weariness I'd seen during those brutal final months in Roseview. "Because someday," he said, "someone like me might walk through your door, and you want them to stay." The new homeowner blinked, then nodded. No more questions. He went back to typing. She went back to listening. And outside, the sun kept rising. Not all revenge needs a headline. Some of it looks like policy, like protection, like a kid building something right from the ground up with guardrails someone else bled to install. Paper cuts don't always scream, but they bleed. And Marcus made sure the stains told a story no one could erase.